Professor Dean and North Texas University for the kind invitation and for giving me the opportunity of coming to Denton. And thank you to you all for your interest in this subject of the Library of Alexandria. With 300,000 volumes, according to some sources, the Library of Alexandria was the biggest ever library from antiquity till the times of Gutenberg. There is no other library that we know of for antiquity or for the Middle Ages that could have assembled so many volumes. So, from another point of view, the Library of Alexandria was an essential step in the transmission of Greek texts from antiquity till nowadays. Because what happened at Alexandria was that they edited virtually all ancient Greek literature up till their times. Then, at one stage, we don't know exactly the date, the Library of Alexandria was burnt in mysterious conditions. The date is disputed, and it becomes very ideological when you look at the literature about the destruction of Alexandria. Everything becomes very, very much ideological. So some people would claim that it was Muslim intolerance who burnt the Library of Alexandria. Other people would claim that it was the Christians who burnt it. Other people would give all other reasons. If you look at the literature upon it, there is one thing which is astonishing, and it is that very seldom we rely upon ancient sources. There is one reason for that. It is because some of the sources have never been translated into English or into any modern language. Here we are going to try to rely very strongly upon primary sources, so about the sources from antiquity. And then you will be able to judge on yourselves. So, let us start with the Library of Alexandria. So I am going to talk first of all about the first dreams about a library that would assemble all the volumes of each literary work that was written in Greek during antiquity. Then we will talk about the rise of that library, then about its decline and its destruction. And our conclusion would be who is responsible of the destruction. First dreams. Let us talk a little bit about libraries in antiquity. Before the times of the Library of Alexandria, the books were available either in the temple's archives, so whenever you had a temple, you had a library that was assigned to it. And then, sometime afterwards, you start to have schools of philosophy, Plato's Academy, Aristotle's Lyceum, and in each of these institutions, you had a very interesting library. You had at least 300 scrolls for each library. 300 scrolls is like 80 books, not more. For instance, you have Aristotle was called the anagnostes, the reader, by his colleagues, because he was always at the library reading. The dream for King Ptolemy of Egypt was to challenge those libraries of the Academy of Plato and the Lyceum of Aristotle, and to make the most biggest ever library of ancient world. There is a person who was very instrumental in that dream and in fulfilling that dream, and that person is Demetrius of Phaleron. I apologize right beforehand if when I pronounce those names I might mispronounce them because I'm used to pronounce them in French, and sometimes it is quite tricky, but I hope that you will understand, and anyway, I've written them. So let us talk about Demetrius of Phaleron. Demetrius of Phaleron was an Athenian. In his early years, he was the student of Theophrastus, who was the successor of Aristotle at the Lyceum, and it is possible that he even attended some classes of Aristotle. At the death of Alexander, very soon afterwards, there is a democratic party which controls Athens, and Demetrius has to take refuge at the Court of Cassandra. Cassandra was one of the rulers of the Hellenistic world after the death of Alexander. You know, when Alexander dies, his general just divide among themselves the empire of Alexander. So then, in 317, he was appointed the Epimeletes of Athens. That means the ruler of Athens. And that period is perhaps the last period of glory for Athens in antiquity. During the rule of Demetrius of Phaleron, what he tries to do is to apply the principles of Aristotle to the city of Athens. He tries to favor the middle class. This period coincides with the last literary period of Athens in a significant way, because it is during that period that you have the plays of Menander. And what happens is that it only lasts for 10 years, because in 307, Demetrius Poliorcetes conquers Athens, and he has to take again refuge at Thebes till the death of Cassandra. And at the death of Cassandra, he goes to Alexandria, where he is welcomed by King Ptolemy I. Unfortunately, he will advise King Ptolemy I not to associate his son Ptolemy II to the reign. And when Ptolemy II happens to start ruling, the first thing he does is to send Demetrius of Phaleron to jail, where he will die. But in the last years with Ptolemy I, he was very much instrumental in setting the outlines of the project of the Library of Alexandria. So what is the setting? In Alexandria, in ancient times, we have 3 different libraries. And it's very important to understand that, because then afterwards, when we look to the sources, we see that the sources sometimes they are talking about one library or another one. If we want to know who has destroyed the library of Alexandria, the main library of Alexandria, the library of Ptolemy I, the library of the museum, we have to talk about the museum, not about the Serapeum. So the museum was built by Ptolemy I, and soon afterwards, Ptolemy Philadelphus organized a scientific community besides the museum. Then there was the Serapeum, which was a small library with respect to the museum. It was called sometimes the daughter library, built by Ptolemy III, and the Serapeum was open to all the public, whereas the museum, the library of the museum, was only intended for the scholars of the museum and other scholars. And it was the library of the family, the royal family. And then Cleopatra VII built the Caesareum around 40 BC, which was also a small library, a small library in comparison to the museum. So here we are. This is the Serapeum, you see, far away from the port. An important fact, because we will see afterwards the sources, and the burning of the museum has to do with the fact that The museum was here, the library and the museum. It was very close to the port. And then you have the Caesareum over there, which was the last library that was added in Alexandria. So in the museum you had scholars living by the museum, and they didn't have to teach. They were appointed by the king, and they were subsidized completely by the king. And Timon of Phlius, around 230, says about them, "Many are those who lead a happy life in densely populated Egypt, those pretentious people full of books who are always fighting in the temple of the Muses." It gives a hint, a glimpse of what life was in the museum. You have here a picture showing reconstruction of what the library of the museum could have been. Of course, in that moment, you have only scrolls. The codex, which is the ancestor of our book, only appears at the end of the 1st century AD. So what you have is scrolls, and scrolls were put into boxes, as you see there. And of course, in a scroll, you could have a tenth or a fourth of what you could put in a book. How many volumes were there? We don't know, because in antiquity, you have the tendency to exaggerate. What we do know is what ancient authors said. So it goes from 40,000, this is the low figure of Seneca, till 700,000, according to some manuscripts, in the works of Aulus Gellius. In the Serapeum, what is clear is that there was a big difference between the number of volumes in the museum and the number in the Serapeum. It could be a tenth what you had in the Serapeum with respect to the number of volumes in the museum. So let us talk about the rise of the Library of Alexandria. I am going to talk about 3 outstanding scholars that will help us understand what happened in Alexandria. We have Zenodotus, Callimachus, and Eratosthenes. Let us start with Zenodotus. He was the first appointed librarian of the library of the museum. To be the librarian of the library of the museum was something very serious. It gave immediately an incredible respectfulness. When we take the list of the known librarians of the Library of Alexandria, almost all of them are outstanding scholars. He edited the text of Homer and other poets, and he wrote a book which he called Glossae, which is the first dictionary that we know of, because it was organized by alphabetic order, and for each lemma you had a definition or an equivalent. And he is the one who starts a school of philologists and editors, because what happens in Alexandria is basically editing the ancient Greek literature. So he was followed by Aristophanes of Byzantium, who was the 4th librarian, and by Aristarchus of Samothrace, who was the 6th librarian, and who had this principle, Homeron ex Homeru Saphenisdei, to explain Homer through Homer. What he meant by that was that when you are editing the text of Homer, if you have among the manuscripts different variant readings, so in one manuscript there is one word, and in another manuscript of Homer, for the same verse at the same place you have a different word, you don't know which one is the correct one. So the rule is to compare, to analyze the style of Homer, and according to the style of Homer and to his way of writing, to decide which of the 2 variant readings is more Homer style like, and then to decide according to that. Then we have Callimachus. Callimachus is a very interesting character because he wrote the first catalog of that library. So he wrote the tables, in Greek pinakes, of the authors who were extant in all the fields of culture, and with respect to the works that they wrote in 120 books. When we are talking about books, we have to understand scrolls. So it's like a fourth of a book of 200 pages. So it would be, a scroll would be the equivalent of 50 pages, something like that. So what he did was to put some labels to each scroll. So you had the scrolls. Each scroll was in a box. Then it had a kind of label like that. And in that label, he wrote the name of the author. He wrote the title of the book, the number of verses, if it was a poetry book. And sometimes, if the title was not enough in order to identify the book, because sometimes you have several authors who have given the same title to a specific book. So then in that case, he gave the first sentence of the book. He was an incredibly learned man. The characteristics of his erudition were that it was scholarship, but deprived of any direct observation. He was amazed by the amazing, if I can say. So he was collecting in ancient Greek literature all the amazing phenomena that people had wrote about. So he was just collecting data, but without any criticism about his sources. So he took for granted whatever was written in a particular book. He had the concern for the detail at the expenses of synthesis and the desire for getting a complete recollection of data. What you have in Alexandria is to get all the books that have been written in Greek up till that date, and even probably some of the books that were written in other languages. This is why, linked to the Library of Alexandria, at least according to some scholars, the problem is disputed, but anyway, the first translation of the Bible into another language, which was the translation of the Septuagint. So the first time the Bible was translated, the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, these, at least according to Aristoteles, happened in Alexandria, and it was the desire of King Ptolemy to get that version. Again, this is the narrative of Aristoteles as to who ordered or didn't order that translation. There are conflicting hypotheses, and the whole story is disputed. But what is sure is that we have in Alexandria, from the 3rd to the 2nd century BC, the first translation of the Bible that appears. Then we have Eratosthenes. I will only say something about this astonishing scholar. He measured the Earth's circumference only with 3 elements: a fact, a measurement, and a calculation. The fact is the following one. He happens to know that in Syene, city down the Nile, 5,000 states away, at summer solstice, the sun falls in a perpendicular way upon the earth. Why? Because there is someone who has seen that very same day that if you look at midday to the bottom of a well, you see, you don't see any shade, any shadow. You see only the sun reflected upon the water in the bottom of the well. So this is the fact. Then he makes a measurement. That very same day, at summer solstice, he measures the obelisk angle with its shadow at Alexandria. So he has an angle, okay? And then through a trigonometric calculation, he measures the circumference of the earth, and he arrives till the measure, if we translate the number of states into kilometers, of 39,690 kilometers instead of the known measure of 40,075. So the margin of error is very, very small, which is astonishing for the 3rd century BC. Those were the scholars, some of the scholars who made the Library of Alexandria. Then we enter into the decline of the Alexandrian library. What happens? The first thing to bear in mind is that in Alexandria, there is a lot of humidity. We are in the delta. Alexandria is not the same thing as the south of Egypt. In the south of Egypt, you could have some papyri who could last for ages. I mean, some of the most ancient copies that we have of the New Testament, we have a copy of the New Testament of the Gospel of John that goes back to the year 150, 175, more or less. And the book of John is complete. The Gospel of John is complete there. And that is something that has been found in South Egypt. Why? Because conditions there are perfect in order to preserve papyri. Whereas in the delta it's impossible. If you don't copy every 50 years, the manuscripts, they just disappear. So if you have an interruption of only 50 years in the work at the Alexandrian library, the library disappears. So Ptolemy Euergetes is one of the kings who, for one reason that we don't know, he decides to banish most of the scholars of the museum. He banishes Aristarchus and Dionysius Thrax, who is the author of the first Greek grammar. Afterwards, what happened? We know of very few scholars linked to the museum. We know of Didymus, who was called the Bibliolathas. Bibliolathas means the one who forgets the books that he has written. Because he wrote so many books that in the end he didn't know what were the books that he had written in the 1st century BC. Then we know that a second building was added to the museum by Claudius in the 1st century AD, according to Suetonius. And then we have an inscription dedicated to Tiberius Claudius Babylos in the middle 1st century AD that describes this Tiberius as someone who is in charge of the museum and of the Bibliotheca Alexandria. So, was he the librarian? Were there books inside? We are going to analyze the problem. Then, what is the last explicit mention of books in the library? Well, we know that at one stage there was a burning at the library. And we know that new books were given to the library. According to Suetonius, it was a gift of Domitian. According to Plutarch, it was a gift of Marcus Antonius. So, either it is not necessarily either or. It could be and. And then the last known librarians, for sure the last known librarian is Alesandros in 85 BC. We have an inscription found at Cyprus, which is very clear and which mentions that Alesandros as a librarian of the Library of Alexandria. If Tiberius Claudius Balbillus was also a librarian, so we would have to say that he would be the last known librarian in the mid-1st century AD. So who destroyed the Library of Alexandria? Let us see first of all what has been said about it. Some people say it was the Muslim conquest in 642. Other people say it was Theodosius' decree, the Emperor Theodosius, who gave a decree to destroy all pagan temples, and so the library was destroyed. Then, other people would say that it were the events in Alexandria during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. And last but not the least, other people would say that it was because of Caesar's conquest of Alexandria in 48 BC that the library was destroyed. We are going to analyze each of the hypotheses according to the sources of antiquity. I am not going to quote any secondary literature. And we are going to see what we can conclude about.